Well, June is arguably one of the best months of the year to go fishing. Why? Well, the bass have just finished up spawning and they are feeding up now. And so you can catch them on just about everything, honestly, but there are standouts that work time and time again throughout the entire country, no matter where you are in most conditions. And I want to talk about those today. There's three main categories of baits. Let's start off with soft plastic baits. There's three within that work all the time. We'll start off with the Senko. Yeah, that's, the Senko style bait. Like the Missile 48 is another one. That works really well because a lot of the bass are up shallow right now and they're in less than 10 feet of water, and that lure works really well down to about 5 or 6 feet of water, weightless. You can fish it wacky style, which is very, very popular. You can just put the hook through the middle. I like to use this little gadget here from Geek Rack, and that works really well because it only puts a little hole in it and the hook is completely away from it, so you really don't rip the bait up as much. It really holds that bait together. That's a little trick I want to pass along to you guys. But you can take this and skip it under docks. You can go along weed edges. You can put it in pockets in the weeds. Just anything shallow that you see, any kind of objects you see, laydowns, whatnot, and just throw it up there weightless and let it just flutter on down and do its thing on slack line, and you'll catch a ton of bass that way. But green pumpkin is what I'd start off with, or watermelon with red seed. If your water's really clear, that's a really good color to go with, or just straight up watermelon. You don't need to go crazy with a lot of colors, although they make over 100 different colors. Just Yamamoto does just in the Senko, let alone all the other manufacturers. So, find one that matches your forage species, and there you go. The next plastic bait that I want to talk to you about is a straight tail worm. Now, a straight tail worm like the robo worm, that works really well, 4-inch to 6-inch size. There's also the magic worm from Missile Baits, very similar bait. These straight tail worms can be thrown anywhere, and they match the forage really, really well. You can put them on a split shot rig or on a drop shot rig, and they work exceptionally well in depths down to 20 foot deep. And if the bite is kind of off, or if you just want to catch a ton of fish, right? You can, even if they're active, you can catch a bunch of fish on this, just a straight tail worm. The colors I like to use is Aaron's Magic, like I mentioned before. People's is another color. I know that's a color. There's also a green pumpkin money color. I think Missile Baits puts that out. Just a variety of different colors out there that work really, really well. And I have perch in my area, so those colors tend to work really well. And also bluegill. Bluegill bite is on right now. They're spawning. So if you got a color that's got a little bit of chartreuse in it or something like that, or you can dip the tail in chartreuse, even better, you can catch a lot of fish that way. The third plastic bait is the tried and true proven ribbon tail worm. Just a 7-inch ribbon tail worm. I think Big Bite Baits makes one that I really like. I think it's the BB something, BB2, I can't remember what it's called. But there's a bunch of others, and it's really simple to use. You just put a 1/4 ounce weight on it. You don't need a heavy weight because there's not any appendages or anything, so it falls through the water pretty quickly. So I wouldn't go more than a 1/4 ounce. And you can use this to target a little bit deeper water. You can target the ends of docks that are in 10 feet of water, brush piles. You can, submerge logs, any kind of rocks or stumps, especially if it's on a long tapering point. As the bass make their way out from the shallows into the summertime haunts, the closest point or secondary point from those flats can be really good, and you can probe them with a ribbon tail worm. And it's really easy. You just drop it down there and just, hop it up and let it flutter, hop it up and let it flutter a couple times. If you don't get bit, reel it up and throw it back out. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to swim it. Just throw it out and then just a nice steady reeling it along, and that ribbon tail just moves along and it looks like a little bait fish. And you do it alongside docks. It works really well that way. Any kind of visible cover and laydowns, that sort of stuff works really well. Texas rig it so you don't get hung up. This is good for probing weeds that are starting to grow up and top out. Great bait to use during June. Now, June is arguably the best month for topwater fishing. Why? Well, like I said, the bass have just got over spawning and they're still up shallow. Most of them are still up shallow. I mean, some have gone out deep, but the majority of the bass are still up in less than 10 feet of water, and so they're susceptible to topwater baits. And the cool thing about it is you don't have to wait till just doing it in the morning or in the evening. The topwater bite can last all day long in June. So that was what makes it really fun. Now, there's three main topwaters that I like to use during this time of the year. The first one is the tried and true, proven Bassresource, the walking the dog kind of bait. The Sammy is excellent bait as well. I think the Yozuri makes that. Great baits to use anytime that the bass are active. You can work it along docks, outside weed lines, over the cross of points, crisscross those points and cover them well as those fish start to move out. And anything that's under the water that they can sit on for a little while, like brush pile or rock pile, anything like that, you can bring that Bassresource right over the top of it and blammo! You can catch a bunch of fish that way. On the Bassresource, I'm pretty straightforward. I just use a frog pattern. It's got a white belly to it. I'll use a perch pattern because there's a lot of perch in my lake, or a bluegill pattern. Works really well, particularly in spring because the bluegill are spawning right now and the bass are feeding on bluegill. You can also use, if your lake is really clear, you can use translucent colors. What I mean by that is it's not transparent, but if you hold it up to the light, you can see the light through it. Those work really well when the water's super clear. They don't have as much of a silhouette to them, and the bass hit them more often. So just in those same color patterns, a shad pattern is one you need to have if you get shad in your lake. The shad spawns on right now, so a shad Bassresource works really well. Poppers, the next topwater to use, particularly around bluegill beds. When the bluegill are spawning, you can bet the bass are nearby, especially right in June, right after they spawn, because they're all up shallow, and they'll be feeding on them. So a little popper that's got a bluegill pattern to it can be deadly. Just work it around those weed edges right next to those bluegill beds. Bluegill beds are easy to find, by the way. It looks like someone threw out a bunch of pancakes on the bottom of the lake floor. They're just these little dish pan, maybe a little bit bigger, dinner plate size. Beds, and they're all together. It's communal, just a bunch of, looks pop marked, pop, 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 pop. And if you look really closely, there's a little bluegill sitting right on them. You can spook them a little bit if you use your trolling motor, or if you're on the shoreline, you can cast out to them. You can see the bluegill move around. The bass will be up there patrolling, feeding on them. So that popper works really, really well in those shallows. Just throw it out in those weed lines and where those bass are lurking, and hold on tight because you're going to catch some fish that way. And the other topwater bait I like to use a lot this time of year is buzz baits. Especially if you got a lot of milfoil or hydrilla in your lake, you can use a buzz bait to cover water. Just go on down the bank, casting and winding, casting and winding. Whether you're from a boat or from the shoreline, you can cover a lot of water with a buzz bait, and you just bring it over the top of those, the milfoil. If it hasn't topped out yet, those bass will come up out of there. They'll be in there. They're lurking in the milfoil right now. And they'll come right up out of there and blast it. So great way to catch a bunch of fish on topwater. Have yourself a blast. The last category is the deeper baits. You want to fish deeper. When some of these bass, especially the early spawners, they've come out deeper now. They're deeper than 10 foot deep. And so you've got to have a category of baits that can reach them. Starting with deep diving crankbaits. Right? And deep diving crankbaits are like 10 to 12 foot deep. I'm not talking the ultra deep, but something like that, 10 to 12 foot deep, maybe 15 at the most. The Rapala DT, they make some. Strike King makes a variety of deep diving baits. There's the Dredger series from Berkeley, so on and so forth. They make a whole variety of different baits that dive different depths. The key with fishing these baits is you want it to dive a little bit deeper than the depth you're fishing. So say, for example, you're fishing in 8 feet of water, you want a crankbait that dives 9 to 10 foot. Why? You want it to bounce and ricochet off the bottom, and any objects off the bottom, especially if you got some scattered boulders or stumps. You want it to get down there and then bang off of that, and that ricochet tends to draw a strike. And if you really want it to make it work even better, when it hits an object like that, let it sit for a second or two. Just pause it and then start reeling again. And that pause and then that change and pick up again, a lot of times that's when the bass hit it. There have been times I've actually got a crankbait stuck in riprap, and I'm popping it. Finally, when it pops free, wham! A fish will annihilate it. So be ready for that too. But those change of a direction, erratic action, that's kind of what you want to have when you're fishing these deeper diving crankbaits. You need to fish them again on those long tapering points that head out, close to the creek channel, where there's creek bends. You got deeper, steeper banks. Hopefully, if you got scattered weeds, or some chunk rock or something in them, that's an excellent place to be fishing these crankbaits. Colors are very simple right now. Shad, because the shad spawns on, so you want to be fishing shad, especially in the early mornings. You got to have that tied on if you got shad in your lake. Bluegill, like I mentioned before, and perch. And like those are the three colors I would stick with right now. You could use crawdads as well if you're fishing a lot of rocks and chunk rock, or your lake is a real like a rocky canyon like you have out west. A crawdad pattern works really well. I like to use the green crawdad and the brown crawdad is my favorite this time of year. Anytime you're fishing riprap, you're gonna have crawdads in there, so a crawdad pattern works really well. Another bait to use to get down to those fish that are a little bit deeper is the football jig. I like to take it and put on a twin tail grub on the end, like a hula grub. Some people call them a spider grub. That is excellent time to fish it right now because you get the crawdads that are out and you get some rocks in the area, maybe riprap, or you got a rocky bank or a shoreline with a lot of riprap on it or rocks, or if you got a long tapering point with scattered boulders on it, drag a football jig. I just use an 1/8 ounce, maybe a 3/16 ounce jig head. And it depends on the wind and the depth, right? So if you're fishing really deep, maybe deeper than 15 foot, I might move up to a 3/8. Or if I've got some wind that I have to deal with, I may even go up to a 1/2 ounce at the most. But starting off with a 3/16 ounce. And I just put like I said, a hula grub on the back of it. Yamamoto 176 color is my go-to bait, but also smoke with salt and pepper is an excellent color. They do make green pumpkin, so that's always a good color to throw. Avocado is another color that I've been throwing for decades, and it works really well. There's a variety of colors. Clear with salt and pepper is another one with a little bit of silver flake. Some lakes that have a certain type of crawdad in it, you can go with gold flake instead or a copper flake. That might trigger the bites. But at any rate, what you're doing here is you're throwing it out and you let it hit the bottom and you drag it on the bottom. You might hop it a couple times, but really you're kind of dragging it along the bottom and crawling across those rocks and boulders and whatnot. And those bass are snug up tight against that, they'll come up and pow, pounce on it. Sometimes it's cast after cast after cast. It can be hot and heavy fishing. So be ready for that. Make sure you got enough plastics because you can tear through them pretty quick. But that's an excellent way to get those fish down deep. And then lastly is the old Carolina rig, right? The ball and chain, been around for decades and it's still very productive for good reason. It just flat out works. And this works really well. You're fishing those deeper humps, points, ledges, those creek channels where the bass are using those as highways to go to deeper water, heading on out for their summer hunts. You can probe it with a Carolina rig. I like to use a little bit bigger bait, a brush hog works really well. A rage hog is an excellent bait to use on the back of it, and just dredge it. Drag along using a 1/2 ounce, maybe a 3/4 ounce weight. Leader is always a big discussion, open to debate. How much do you have between the weight and the hook? I like to start off with 2 foot, that's just a general preference. If the bass are really aggressive and you're getting a lot of bites, I might shorten that up a little bit. But if they're lethargic and you're not getting a lot of bites, then I make it 3 foot. I've been known to fish them as long as 5 foot. That's extreme measure, but 2 to 3 foot is that covers most of the time when you're fishing these. You can also put creature baits on the back, like a rage bug or a space monkey or something a little bit with more beef on it, to get those bigger bass. Because a lot of times in June, the bigger bass are the first ones to move out deeper, and so targeting them with a Carolina rig with a larger bait is the way to get to them. So I hope that helps. For more tips and tricks like this, visit bassresource.com.